SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
A warm welcome to all of you. In the last class, we discussed about the 4 cases related to the management of natural resources by different resource communities. In today's class, I am going to focus on the community based management of man-made resources. I will be sharing 2 cases with you. The first one is based on an article named Ideas, Artifacts and Facilities, Information as a Common Pool Resource by Charlotte Hess and Elinor Ostrom. In this article, the authors treat the information as a resource and discuss how the arrangement around it are gradually changing with the advent of the digital knowledge. The domain of knowledge or information as a common pool resource is complicated, as there are multiple resource users. Thus, a lot of interests are in conflict with each other. Unprecedented changes in the technology, gap in understanding of the resource and conflict between the local and the global locations. The author argued that collective action and the new institutional design play a larger part in shaping the scholarly information as do the legal restrictions and market forces in the domain of knowledge or information. To understand the institutional arrangements, they have distinguished between the concept of artifact, facility and ideas. So, what do these concepts mean? According to Hess and Ostrom, an artifact is a discrete, observable, namely representation of an idea or a set of ideas. This artifact can be both physical, such as the book, article, files, notes and so on, or they can be digital, which will include digital versions of the same. While the physical version cannot be used by multiple users at the same time, the digital ones can. Artifacts are thus flow units that users can be excluded from using depending on whether they are physical or digital in nature. The latter makes exclusion a difficult process. Let us now explore the concept of ideas. Ideas are derived from artifacts. In the words of Hess and Ostrom, ideas can refer to the creative version, the intangible content, innovative information and knowledge. Unlike artifacts, which are physical flow units, ideas are tangible flow units. As a result, nobody has the copyright to use an idea. 2 people can have the same idea at the same point of time. So, now you know what artifacts and ideas are, but you must be wondering, where are they stored? This is where the need of facility arises. They are storage spaces for artifacts and ideas. Moreover, they make these artifacts and ideas available to users. Earlier, there were physical facilities such as libraries and archives, which had an upper limit for the number of resources that could be stored within them. Most libraries and archives also have rules to regulate the number of users as well as monitor the number of hours their resources are being accessed by the users. The facilities also have the right to regulate the user's behavior within its wall. However, when it comes to the digital artifact, these rules are no longer applicable in that way. Keeping the 3 dimension in mind, The authors argue that information as a resource not only has cultural importance, but also the economic, political and intellectual functions. Moreover, a flow of resource, it must be shared among the individuals to remain relevant. Additionally, according to Hess and Ostrom, information has complex tangible and intangible attributes, fuzzy boundaries, a diverse community of users on local, regional, national and international level, and multiple layers of rule making institutions. The traditional way of producing an information resource requires the following steps. The writers come up with a draft containing the ideas and the artifacts, which they then send to the publishers, who then sends it to the reviewers. Once the draft has been reviewed, it gets published as a book or an article. It is then indexed in a facility such as library, and the users can access the said book or the article by accessing the journal by using the library database. In this case, the writers retain the copyright to their work, while the publishing house can reproduce the artifact and sell the copies to these kinds of facilities. These facilities then take charge of the artifact, maintain it, preserve it and make it accessible to the users under certain terms and conditions. The arrangement is different when it comes to digital information. Since these kinds of information do not have any physical or tangible attributes, it is difficult to draw boundaries around it. For this reason, it is more likely that the digital information will be licensed than sold. The matter becomes more complex in case of internet, which is not only digital but also shared among multiple users. However, unlike the natural resources, it does not deteriorate. Since the end of 20th century, digital facilities have increasingly replaced the physical ones. As a result, the flow of information has drastically changed. The author's draft still goes through the publishers and the reviewers before getting published. However, the newly published book or article is now under the publisher's control, as it is no longer sold to the facility but provided under a license. As a result, the user may have to sell out money every time they want to access the resource. Even the cataloging at a facility is licensed out to the publisher. Think about all the times that you have tried to access an online resource or an article for your research, only to find out that that it is either available through your institutional server or by a payment of a hefty fee. Your experience have been a direct result of the change in how the digital information is stored, managed and made available to the users. As a way out of this conundrum, creators of information have joined hands with caretakers of facilities to bypass the involvement of publishers and avoid the hefty charge for accessibility. This has revolutionized the field of digital artifacts and has embodied the fight against the copyright restriction. The movement has its own root in the website called rzic.org. rvics.org was designed by a physicist named Paul Ginsberg in 1991. The website is a repository of scholarly published papers which are available free of cost. Since there is no peer reviewed involved, scholars have to themselves cause the quality of the papers. However, the website has a footfall of over 60,000 to 1,30,000 per day. Some other similar initiatives are Oxford Test Archive, Biomed Central, the Digital Library of the Commons and so on. Public Library or the Science or PLS grassroots approach taken by a group of scientists striving to make global scientific medical literature accessible to everyone for the advancement of science and technology. The Open Archives or OAI, created by a group of information scholars to facilitate distribution of scholarly work through the establishment of digital archives. They treat artifact as a record accessible through their servers. Let us now look into the flow chart for this particular approach of publishing. The writers produce manuscript, the reviewer version of which is self-archived by the writer themselves in a digital repository. In this case, it is the facility that facilitates further dissemination of the manuscript after following the OAI standards. In Hess and Ostrom words, what is new in the self-archiving initiative is that the author are participating independently of government and market in an international epistemic community that is committed to building an interoperable global scholarly library, a universal public good for which the more who have access, the greater the benefit for everyone. What are then the design principles for these kinds of new resources which are different from what we have been discussing in the earlier module? According to the report published by the Research Library Group and the OCLC, arrangements in charge of governing these resources must have audibility, security and communication, compliance and conscientiousness, certification, copying controls and following rules, backup policy and avoiding, detecting and restoring lost or corrupted information, reputation and performance, agreements between creators and providers, open sharing of information about what it is preserving and for whom, balanced risk, benefits and cost, complementarity, cost effectiveness, scalability and confidence, evaluation of system components. It is important to note that although digital resources are easily and widely accessible, they are not as stable as their traditional counterparts. Contributors have the rights to retract any piece of digital information from the online repository, something that is not possible in case of physical artifact. Digital artifacts are a completely novel kind of information resources given their virtual nature. There has been a shift of scholarly task as inactive consumer of information to active producers of the same as they have realized the importance of collective action in this case. The aim is not just limited to preservation of the digital information resource, but also equitable access in all concerns of the earth through the implementation of rules and protocols at both local and global levels. Now let us look at the second case, and here we will deal with culture as a common resource. The case is based on a study that was done by my PhD student Sohini, who undertook the case, and it was published as an article, The Quotition Project and the Tawai's Cultural Community, in the International Journal of the Commons. It is a case study on the performing community of the Tawais and an attempt to understand how they produced, managed and reproduced their performing acts as a cultural commons. We had discussed what cultural commons are in the first class. However, just to remind you again about what Bertaccini meant by cultural commons is that cultural commons refers to cultures expressed and shared by a community in a given space and time. The case that I will be discussing understands the performing group of Tawais as the community, the dance form of Kathak, the singing genre of Tumri and the detailed dressing regime they produced, shared and passed down intergenerationally as the cultural resources, and finally the kotas they resided and performed in as the spaces of cultural production. Cultural commons in their material and non-material manifestations are products of human interaction and must be passed down from one generation to another. Although they are non-rival in nature, they have unlimited carrying capacity. Bertaccini et al. Have identified two classes of social dilemmas associated with the management and production. The first dilemma, the users appropriate the resource without giving back the to a creation of the free riding problem. Second dilemma is an uncertainty in the process of cultural transmission, as the traditionalists and the innovators within the community are unable to reach a consensus on the best course of evolution of the cultural commons or the commons resource. The case study at hand argues that the social dilemmas capture problem related to the interactional or interaction structures. However, they fail to take the socio-cultural embeddedness of the common resource into account, which is quintessential to the discussion of the Tawayef's traditional performing arts as cultural commons. Let me first introduce you to the community of Tawayefs before discussing further. The community under study were a group of elite performing artists based in Lucknow, which was the capital of Oudh in the British India. The census report of 1891 and 1911 estimate that there were 495 and 128 Tawayefs respectively in the city of Lucknow. The community was socially cohesive and followed a form of matrilineal descent. The head was a matriarch and usually they were referred to as the Chaudharayans. While there were both men and women in the community, their function differed from each other. The women received training from their predecessors in performing arts and etiquette from a very young age. They also inherited their mother's properties. Men, on the other hand, were either born within the community or recruited from outside by the Chaudharayans to play instruments, cook food, provide security, and so on. The Tawayefs performed in several spaces such as the court assemblies, private parties and salons or kothas. No matter what the performance spaces were, the members had to engage in close interaction with each other to ensure an uninterrupted production of the cultural commons. Through their process of production, a powerful performing identity was born that let them manage their performing arts for their own benefit. To ensure the survival of this particular identity, Tawayefs needed to access the performing or the performance space without any restriction, regularly interact with each other and continuously produce the idiosyncratic art. However, there were major factors that affected the Tawayefs' production of cultural commons. First, the East India Company began to question the extravagant nature of dance parties that were hosted by the natives. For the former, these were indication of the maladministration. The British government responded by seizing the salon or the kothas, which doubled up as the Tawayefs' residence. The loss of performance space rendered a blow to the production process of the Tawayef. Second, an anti-nautch or anti-dance campaign was launched by the Christian missionaries and the Indian social reformers around the years 1892. This led to a wide-scale banning of the dance performance or the in front of an audience. Although Tawayefs were not regularly dancing girls, the diaries and records left by European travelers obliterated all the difference. As a result, the Tawayefs were not allowed to continue with their performance. By the year 1990 or 1900s, their performance tradition had almost come to an end. Third, the community's performing art were gradually stigmatized due to the Victorian morality and the newly emerging nationalist sentiments. Purists and nationalists made attempt to appropriate the dance and music of Tawayefs without acknowledging their contribution to the art form. The Tawayef art were gradually remodeled as classical arts with no significance given to the Tawayef communities or the producers. Hence, the identities of the Tawayefs degraded due to the shift of performing art from the kothas, the modification in their idiosyncratic repertoire, and finally the denial of their status as an elite performing community. Thus, we argue that due to the reduced number of members amid a financial crisis, forced relocation and increasing stigmatization, uncertainty was created in transmission of Tawayef's cultural common to their subsequent generation. The community of Tawayefs faced what Bhattacharya and others have termed as a tragedy of the cultural common. It happens when communities' culture erode due to lack of cultural input. Thus, in this case, Tawayevs we argue that though through the introduction of socio-cultural context to the analysis of cultural commons, that the loss of desirable community identity which resulted in a degraded social value of the community can lead to a potential social dilemma for the protection and the maintenance of the cultural commons, and hence can be added as a third dilemma in the works of Battachini and others, categorizing or categories that they have built in analyzing the cultural commons. The discussion on these two man-made resources brings out new dimensions in the management of common resources. They highlight the adjustment that need to be made in the management process, keeping in mind the physical or the virtual nature of the resource in question. And that is all for today's class. I will see you in the next one. Have a great day ahead.